Hello and welcome. Today is Thursday, September 25th, 2019. This is the weekly Cluster API office hours meeting, and Cluster API is a subproject of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. If you are not familiar with the meeting, we do have a meeting etiquette section at the top of our meeting notes document. Generally, please use the raise hand feature of Zoom, and I will do my best to make sure that I am paying attention as you do raise your hands. And if you have topics that you're interested in discussing, please add them to this document. There is a section here towards the bottom of the agenda where you can add agenda items. And also, please make sure that you add your name to the attending list. All right. First up, we have Vince with some PSAs.
I'll share my screen. I prepared like some sort of presentation for the one that didn't attend the Cluster API face-to-face meeting, which was great, and thank you all for coming. I tried to kind of summarize the meeting notes that we have, and there are a few links, and if someone can put them in the meeting notes, that would be great, if you want to look in more details. But the first thing that we did was an introduction to V1 Alpha 2 and then a retrospective. And I tried to summarize these because there were a lot of items, and these are kind of the most voted ones. So what went well? One of the most, the things that like people agreed upon is that the foundation V1 Alpha 2 is really good, and the pace of progress that we had towards the end of the release was astounding. And there was something that people kind of like gave a lot of +1. What didn't go well is that in the beginning, we had a lot of start and stop, spinning our wheels, and the progress was really slow. And this was mostly, I'm not sure who here was involved in the V1 Alpha 1 to V1 Alpha 2 planning, but it was mostly to get the community goals and scope and objectives like kind of like in writing, and like we have a process like now for like KEPs and feature development. And another thing was that not all providers were able to move to V1 Alpha 2 at the same time and pace. And this came up like kind of a lot during the face-to-face, which was we had like a fast development cycle, which kind of, it's one of the pros that we have here, but at the same time, we left a lot of providers behind with like kind of lack of documentation, lack of release notes, and contracts between what we would expect an infrastructure provider to do or a bootstrap provider to do as well. Any questions so far? Okay. What should we keep doing? We should avoid boiling the ocean. And this is something that kind of like resonates with what I was saying before, that like we had a lot of stop and stop in the last iteration. So we should keep this in mind, that we're working on alpha releases, and that like every one of us like wants to do kind of like everything in the V1 release, but there is so much time. And people also like that we have that we would have like kind of like open forums, maybe a KubeCon for in November, like once again, and definitely write down ideas and issues. And something that's not captured here was to start also doing some POCs. So if folks like want to POC something and present it, like we should have like demos and like in our agendas, so that people can kind of show what they have worked on for Cluster API. We should definitely start and continue our end-to-end testing. This was the most voted issue, or like actually item that everybody agreed upon. Like I think there was the majority of people that said we have to focus a lot on end-to-end testing. And from my conversation with other folks as well, like it was clear that end-to-end testing is something that comes up a lot when you say like, why don't you rely on Cluster API, and what would make it better? It's having like that signal that Cluster API is solid, and the end-to-end test for Kubernetes, Cluster API, and the providers are in place. Definitely more emphasis on documentation. We have some action items coming from here, and they're at the end of the presentation. But documentation is really lacking today as well, and we'll welcome a lot of contributors. I'm happy to onboard new contributors as well if they want to help on this. We, for the first time in V1 Alpha 2, we pushed the quick start out, which was an improvement from what we had before, which was almost sparse documentation in different infrastructure providers. And yeah, so going forward, we should definitely like put more emphasis on this. Release more frequently. And this is, maybe this is not the correct wording for this, but it's more like if we want to go to V1 Alpha 3, and we have a breaking changes, we should make sure that we have alphas, beta, or RCs, which also require documentation, which will ease the transition, and it would like kind of also allow providers, infrastructure providers, or Bootstrap providers to update the version of Cluster API without using master, which when you update a version, then you have like a set of changes that you can pull in, and you know what has changed or what hasn't changed. Be more deliberate and explicit about expectation from providers' contracts. This goes back on like why providers have moved to V1 Alpha 2, and this is something that there is some open PRs about it, and it goes back to more emphasis on documentation, which we kind of have to do a lot of. Tim also says well-structured release processes, and that goes kind of in here. And I think, Tim, you opened some issues yesterday around this. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Any questions so far? Or anything you would like to add? All right. This diagram is like super high level overview. So after we talk about the retrospective, it was clear, and Tim kind of like to draw this on the whiteboard and try to do a really nice diagram here, that we have really like two main consumers for Cluster API, which are developers from one side and operators from other side. And there's not just one operator. It's like we made sure to say like it's plural because there's multiple kinds of operators as well. But these personas kind of like focus on different sides of the spectrum of what we have to improve. For example, developers want a better release process, onboarding and documentation, and make sure that like there are no regressions. And that also there's a really good cross-team execution. And this specifically goes back to the contracts that we don't have and to the failure of like bringing all the infrastructure providers up to date for V1 Alpha 2. For operators, like we kind of like they focus on the usage, which so it's like more like a user experience. And today we have like a lot of YAML and a lot of boilerplate YAML that like needs to be applied to just create one cluster. And the operators is kind of like the group that where we would like receive a feedback from to improve our product and like do just generally a better offering. One other thing that I wanted to highlight is like, I'm not going to read through all of this, but that like we kind of went around the room and saying like how everybody was using Cluster API and what for. And it's clear there's like a few teams here. Like there's a lot of like folks that are trying to deliver Kubernetes as a service. So like, for example, vSphere and Azure, or offer Cluster API as an internal solution to other stakeholders. So this is more like like a company, a group of people, like maybe an SRE team or an infrastructure team that uses Cluster API and then gives it out to like other people to run their containers and manage their clusters. And then there is like a lot of people that actually like mention integrating Cluster API. So like Gartner, COPS, Anthos, and Enterprise PKS, OpenShift, and Metal 3 for bare metal clusters. These are all like users of Cluster API, but they have a slightly different use case, as in like they build upon Cluster API, then don't necessarily expose it. And then we have like other like functions, for example, build Kubernetes clusters to run containers, which is the most simplistic one, and also use it as a library is also another kind of like pattern that I have kind of seen like in the notes that we took. Any questions so far? Cool. Either one doing a really good job or a really bad job at this. So the output of the face-to-face, it was that we're kind of trying to get like some proposals out, and at the top of the document, the meeting notes that that we have, there is kind of like the ongoing V1-FF3 proposal, and there is control plane management, cluster upgrades, machine pools, the remediation, conformance/testing, and there is a load balance provider, which I believe it might actually go out of, it might not be a proposal, but I think Moshe can speak to that even more. Then there is action item/issues, one of it which is to move the kubeadm and Docker provider in 3. And I have like an item on the agenda to talk about this with you all in the community. And this is mostly focused to kind of improve the user experience, but also allow for better end-to-end testing. We have an action item to update our personas and use cases document, which I believe there's a group of 3 people already working on it. And then there's the CRD's V1 upgrade and minimum Kubernetes version, which came out in 1.16, which I also believe Andy put something on the agenda for today. I can stop sharing now. I think if you have any questions, please reach out or speak up.
There was one thing that was missing that we talked about, that was to upgrade, and there's a constraint here to upgrade to the latest version of KubeBuilder. It wasn't necessarily recorded in the notes here. We recorded it separately. To update the latest version of KubeBuilder because CRDs went to GA and there's certain feature enablements. The constraint is that for V1 Alpha 3, we'd pin deployment of clusters at 116 plus then as a result.
Yeah, that's the item that I have highlighted here, and that's what Vince was referring to about CRD V1 on his.
Oh, okay. I missed it then. Sorry.
Oh.
Okay, Vince, you've got the next item as well.
Yeah, so I'll keep talking. So Chuck opened an issue a few weeks ago, I believe, to bring CAPD and kubeadm provider in 3. It has like a lot of context. I'll link it, or Chuck, if you can link it, it would be great, in the document. So the reason for this, and that I wanted to bring this up is because there is a lot of kind of worry that like the user experience today is not the greatest, which is not, and that again, like the end-to-end testing, as we talked about it, the face-to-face is kind of like the #1 issue that everybody agreed upon, that we have like a little coverage. So bringing these two in providers in 3, like kind of favors for the kubeadm the user experience. And for the Docker provider, it will allow us to actually test this in CI as a unit. So when we make breaking changes, we will like be able to kind of like get all the latest changes that we have for a release and kick off a CI job, and that tests all of these 3 providers as like one deployment of cluster API, and it will also set expectations. And I believe up in the document, there is also a proposal like to how to write like a testing framework, which also Chuck is working on. And my question for the community here is like, are there any, are we worried about that this is such a bad idea that we shouldn't do? Or can we start like kind of jotting down action items and pushing this forward to kind of like allow for these use cases to be completed for V1 Alpha 3?
So I would say if there's no feedback, we probably should go with our usual 1-week lazy consensus on this. Mm-hmm. So if you do think of anything, please check out this issue that's linked and add your comments, and we'll aim to resolve this next week.
Sounds good. And I'll jot down some action items that we would have so that we can all be kind of on the same page of what needs to be done and the scope of it.
Justin.
I was just gonna say, like, I probably am the person I'm most likely to object to this because of, like, we shouldn't bring kubeADM and make it bless it in any way. However, I think that is outweighed by the fact that, like, having good test coverage of some scenario is very important, and the value of this is it doesn't have external or significant external dependencies. Like, it doesn't depend on a cloud provider. So despite what people might believe, I am actually in favor of this.
Thanks, Justin. And yeah, to that, like, I would add that, like, it's not that just we want to move code around. It's mostly to solve, like, this holistic issue of, like, end-to-end testing, but also we will make sure that, like, along this process, we don't break the contracts that we maybe want to do for Bootstrap providers, so that if there are external Bootstrap providers today, we'll make sure to test that those contracts as well going forward.
All right. Lee, are you on the call? Or Justin, do you know anything about Lee's item here?
I am supposed to look at this. I have not yet looked at it in detail. I will endeavor to do so, but yeah, we should probably wait for Lee to talk about this. It might be one that we actually talk about more in the cluster API general meeting, but it's about how we integrate add-ons with kubeADM, and I think he's thinking about whether there are any particular implications for cluster API. I can't imagine there are.
I don't think there are. It's a separate step, so.
Yeah, I think the most likely implication would be, like, sort of the thing we discussed about, like, a bundle of YAML files, or bundle of YAML objects that may be getting bigger, and how we feel about that, whether we, like, my personal view is, like, that's not a problem. I know other people disagree, and I think that's great. But
I just hate YAML. That's all.
Yes. Yeah, we can talk about that offline, I think.
All right. Well, we'll maybe come back to this if Lee arrives. Amy, you are up next.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. So I wanted to talk about cluster upgrades. And we tried to get names to figure out who is interested in working on cluster upgrades for specifically targeting V1 Alpha 3. And so I figured I'd make sure to mention everyone here. So the folks working on it will be Andrew Doi from New Relic, Matt Dennison from New Relic, Nadir, and then myself. If you're interested in working on this problem space, definitely tack your name down under that bullet point, and we can go from there. So I created a survey. However, I think we need to internally make sure that there's no GDPR conflicts, but I'll share my screen so that we can at least look at the questions, because I think it's really important to collect data on like what context everyone is using. Difficult last week was that kind of like listing goals and non-goals removed cluster upgrades from the context from which everyone was using it, and like I didn't really have any context of like why certain things were in goals or non-goals. So I figured collecting data is always useful, and let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I'll do this demo in a second, but so we'll have questions like, describe what context you're upgrading your cluster. So this covered like, whether or not you're an infrastructure as a service product, conducting cluster upgrades on a fleet of clusters. If you're a developer, like I'd love for you to go into more detail about like what you're using cluster upgrades for and in which context. Architectural diagrams are super useful. Obviously, like don't release any proprietary information, but anything you're able to sort of like anonymize on a super describing what constraints you have in environments where you're conducting your cluster upgrades. So for instance, a lot of people mentioned last week air-gapped environments. And again, the whole infrastructure as a service kind of realm where or if you're maybe like orchestrating with external systems, or if you have certain organizational process that you need to integrate with. If you are updating clusters today without cluster API, like I'd love to understand how you're doing that today. And again, if you are doing this, let me know what pain points you're experiencing. And this first section is I wanted to, this is like without cluster API in the context. And the second thing is more detail in like what you're expecting out of a solution. And not only what you're expecting, but like why you're expecting it. So what I mean by why is like, you need to tie it back to the context in which you're using, which you're expecting to use the cluster, some sort of cluster upgrade orchestrator, and like how you'll be using it, because it's super useful to help contextualize that information. So I'll definitely send this out through the mailing list when we can confirm that there's no, like law-related conflicts. But I think collecting information is super useful. And definitely if you are invested in the end results of whatever the cluster API cluster upgrade solution look like, definitely fill this out because it's hard to understand what folks want and why they want it without more information. So hope you fill that out when it comes in your inbox. Let's see, what else today? Okay, so I was working on updating the like this proof of concept cluster upgrade tool that we have to target V1 Alpha 2 cluster API clusters. I didn't pull out that repo, but I can do that now. So this is the repo where this kind of like proof of concept tool is being made. It's pretty, I'm still working on merging my PR for which V1 Alpha 2 works, but this is what I have locally, so I can kind of demo what we have. I want to pull this out. Cool. So because it takes a while to kind of like spin up, child clusters, I have spun that up already. We can see here that the control plane that I have spun up is version of V1 Alpha 2. And what I want, let me clear the screen and kind of make that more clear. Let me get the nodes. Okay, so this is V1 Alpha. I just want to put this all on one screen. Equals, this is so my management cluster is through kind. Let me go ahead and get some machines and we can see what objects that we have. So we have CAPI quick start control plane 0. Let me go ahead and dump the YAML out for that. That's a lot of YAML. And the version is somewhere on here. Oh, right here. Okay, so this machine is V1 14.6. And what we'll be doing is upgrading it to V1 15.3. So go ahead. So this is a really long CLI command to upgrade this. Let me kind of walk through what we're doing. So this is the main thing that to notice here is we're upgrading the control plane to V1 15.3, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we'll go through a a series of steps to run the upgrades. We're doing some level of like etcd coordination here, where the way that this proof of concept works is it'll spin up a new machine with the version that you want, join that etcd member to the control plane, and then once it sees like all the health checks are cleared, then it'll go ahead and delete the old machine. So it kind of takes a second to do that. And then here's a new control plane spin up. And then the other thing that we'll see is the machine state for the old control plane machine will change to deleting. It kind of takes a second. Cool. Updating provider. Okay. So here we can see that it's deleting the existing machine. I don't have this tool wait until the machine is deleted and disappeared yet, but I'll think about that functionality later. But let me go ahead and pull up all the machines and run a watch. So here you can see that the state for this old control plane machine is deleting. And this is actually the new control plane machine. And if I restart this, what you can see for this status is that this instance state is shutting down. I won't make you all wait for this machine to actually shut down, but what happens is after this control plane machine shuts down, then the controller will go ahead and delete this representation of that node. And then later on, I don't want to like stall this meeting too much, but this also works for worker nodes, and I can demo that after this deletion happens if you all want to come to me later. So thanks.
Thank you, Amy. Does anybody have any questions for Amy? Alrighty. And again, we will be posting a link to the survey to most likely the SIG Cluster Lifecycle mailing list and Slack as well, and we will update the agenda here and meeting notes with a link to the survey too. All right, Chuck.
Yes, hello. I have put together a roadmap or plan for the CAPD project, which, as Vince mentioned, we are considering merging that into Cluster API. It relates mostly to improving the testing and the reliability of the code itself. If you wanted to take a look at that, I would love your feedback. And if we could, anybody who's interested in the CAPD project, I know that's not everybody here, but it's a subset of people here. And if you have any thoughts on that, I'd love to get to a point where we can agree on what the goals and milestones moving forward will be, and then we can sort of file issues from there. So let's do that one offline in an asynchronous manner. And then I've got the next item, so I'll just keep going. I would like to add one of the reviewers to promote to a maintainer. And this sort of gets into a larger topic that we discussed at the face-to-face, which is sort of automating the process of promoting people through the various Kubernetes approver reviewer statuses. And I think that's something that I also need to do for the project in general of CABPK and also the project of CAPD. But there is one particular reviewer that I would like to promote to a maintainer. So I'll open a PR and do the standard 1 week timeout. If anybody has any comments on that, please feel free to comment on the PR. It is not open yet, but I will add it to this, the notes here. I'll add a link to the notes here when I open that.
Thanks, Chuck. Just to echo, we will be doing similar PRs for promotions for Cluster API and Kappa as well. And this is something that we do want to be doing at regular intervals, essentially whenever we finish a release and start a new one, we'd like to review the owner's files and make sure that we are promoting people who are actively involved. And then if there's people who have stepped away for whatever reason, removing them until they have a chance to come back in the future. And we will do the 1 week lazy consensus on the PRs, and we'll try and get them open today, and we can talk about them, or at least mention them again next week. Okay, any questions on that? I'm not seeing any hands. All right, I've got the next one. So we mentioned this very briefly at the beginning. I have filed an issue as a result of the discussions from last week at the face-to-face to propose that we upgrade to V1 of custom resource definitions, which has the side effect that it will require Kubernetes 1.16 or newer for the management clusters. This is not for the workload cluster, just the management clusters. If you have strong feelings one way or another, or any comments in general, please add them to this. And if we get community agreement, we will make this change for V1 Alpha 3. Okay, next up is Derek with the Domain Tools user story. Derek, over to you.
Hi. Domain Tools is in the middle of moving to a hybrid cloud approach with Kubernetes. Right now, we're deploying things on-prem with Ansible and in the cloud with Terraform, and want to move to a more Kubernetes as a platform for our platform approach. So in looking at the stuff that we need to build to do that, there's a lot of overlap between the types of CRDs and operators that we were speccing out with Cluster API. And actually, there's a lot of tools that cover parts of our use cases, but not everything. So that's kind of a common theme. And our hope really is to adopt what we can that will be around long term, that meets our needs, and build what we need to make something that works for now, with the hope of leaning more on community supported stuff as we move forward. I'm really happy to see the kinds of use cases that you all talked about in your face-to-face meeting, because a lot of that is exactly what we're trying to do and what we want. Part of the story, I think, that we're looking at is enabling operators and developers to work on parts of the platform or the overall system that we're building independently. One of the things that seems a little bit difficult right now, just looking at, I haven't spent a lot of time playing with trying to get Cluster API to do what I want it to do, but really enabling our network engineers to focus on things like VPC and ACLs, and provisioning things with security and policy, and having our actually all of the infrastructure layer, having those pieces be able to be controlled by the teams that focus on those things, and having the developers be able to specify requirements or like labels for certain components of infrastructure that clusters provide to the application developer. Because there's like this unfortunate loose coupling between, I need to run in a Kubernetes cluster that offers nodes that have GPUs on them, but I don't want to actually write the Terraform to provision nodes and do all this stuff. So really enabling us to approach our clusters as sets of resources that offer specific services, or that you could request those things to be added at a conceptual layer as a developer from a pool of things defined by our operations team. Using CRDs and best practices in terms of all this, to preferably Cluster API or other tools that do these sorts of things. That let's see, concerns that I have right now, just looking at being able to adopt Cluster API right now, are more how much control do we have over the provider layer of things and different aspects of, it's not just about having a cluster and upgrading a cluster, it's control over like the details of what that cluster is running on. And I know there's like blurry lines of scope on all this stuff, and you know, that's a thing that I'd like to see more detail around what that kind of a story is. Let's see, anything else relevant here? Yeah, just one of the major goals is being able to provision all of our infrastructure as code and manage it all in a Kubernetes-centric model, monitoring it with the same tools we use for our application code. We kind of come at everything with the approach of like 3 layers of application, platform, and infrastructure, and having all of those things be loosely coupled together. So that model doesn't always fit with every tool we want to use. So trying to figure out how does this fit into a larger space of being able to integrate with a whole bunch of other things is one of the things that we're working on too. So I think that's our story right now. I appreciate you guys listening. I'm excited about where Cluster API is headed.
Thanks, Derek. I would ask that if there's any, like as specific as you can be, I know you mentioned GPUs as an example, but if as you're kicking the tires on Cluster API, if you find use cases that it doesn't meet your needs for, please try and file issues that are as specific as possible so that we can try and address them.
Will do. Thanks.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Derek? All right, Vince, you're up next.
Yeah, I have a CapG update from DIMS. So the past week, one of the goals of CapG is to kind of remove the /cluster directory from KK. We have been working towards like kind of enabling end-to-end testing in CapG itself for now, and then kind of like move that upstream as things done kind of like are looking solid. And we're working on this effort like kind of on the side. There has been a lot of things that broke CapG, like because we didn't have like a good enough just testing coverage. So we're working on that, and DIMS is all in on this end-to-end testing for CapG. For CapC, I've been working with Cecile like a lot in the past few weeks, and Steve and Augustus to bring CapC to V1 Alpha 2. He made really good progress, and we kind of like stumble upon the next issue, which is going to be image building. So we don't have like a target date in mind for CapC to be in V1 Alpha 2, but I hope to have like a better story next week.
So in addition on the CapC side, we're adding a meeting finally. So the meeting will be the week of I want to say October 7th. So I'll send out a doodle to the cluster lifecycle group if people are interested in joining that meeting. We've also wired up some of the stuff that's required to do automatic image pushing for the CapC repos. So we're starting to get closer to the Kappa space and the rest of the providers. So thank you again to Vince. You've been tremendous in getting us to that point, and definitely shout out to Cecile, who's actually writing all the type code and refactoring some of the stuff right now. So.
All All right. Any questions or comments for either Vince or Stephen? All right. I don't see any other agenda items, but before I go on to issue triage, if you do have anything that you thought of at the last minute, feel free to speak up now. Otherwise, we'll go into issue triage, and there's not many.
We're going to be probably have to go through, not today, but I'm going to be going through with a fine-tooth comb a bunch of issues in the backlog to try and figure out where they fit, especially given that we're going to have other people spinning online and whether or not we should remove them. So there's some new inbound ones, obviously, but that we should triage. But just a PSA that we're going to take a wrecking ball to a lot of issues. So.
Do you want to try and schedule a time for that, or like how do you do that with CubeADM, for example?
We do have asynchronous times for people that are interested, if you're interested. So I could basically block, say tomorrow or something, if people are interested in joining. Please just say in the Slack channel. But my plan is to go through a lot of the old issues and items that we've kind of had hanging out forever. And Vince has been poking me and I've been poking Andy, and I'm starting to go through things in more detail that we should probably close out a bunch of these legacy issues that we currently have. So that way when you go to V1 Alpha 3, we have a concrete backlog and burn down list that we really think is more endemic of what we want to try to target.
Makes sense to me. All right. So we have, let me just refresh to make sure there's nothing new. 2 unmilestoned cluster API issues. First one is please add a version command for ClusterCuddle. I totally agree with this, unless we actually get rid of it, like we're talking about doing. So Tim, I'm going to defer to you on this one in terms of priority and milestone.
Say important soon, assign it to me, and I'm going to loop in Fabrizio, and we're going to probably go through all those issues together, Fabrizio and myself. And as well as anyone else who really cares a lot about ClusterCuddle.
All right, thanks. And we have your umbrella issue from yesterday. Do you care about assigning a milestone to this?
I think we should assign it to the V1 Alpha 3 just so the community is aware. And then as people do PRs, they can, or have issues, they can cross-reference the larger feedback that we got from the community engagement.
Makes sense. And for everybody on the call, we do have a new milestone, V0.3.0, which is representing the V1 Alpha 3 work, because Cluster API V0.2.x is the V1 Alpha 2 release branch. Okay, so that takes care of CAPI, and for the Bootstrap provider, we just have one, which is a buggy, spammy thing about control plane init unlocking. And it looks like, Chuck, do you know the status on this one?
Let me see. Sorry. Yeah, this is just extraneous log lines. They are ignorable, and this is not particularly urgent.
Okay. Any objections to putting it in the zero?
No, that's fine.
Milestone? Okay.
Yeah, I need to look at the status. I thought a PR was in for this, but there've been a couple that I got confused about in the last couple of days. So, oh yeah, that one.
Which has emerged. So maybe offline you can just double check and see if it actually fixed it.
Yeah, I'll go through my issues. Yep.
Thanks.
No
all
problem.
Right. That's all the open issues. So we've got 15 minutes left. If anybody has anything else you want to talk about, if not, we can give you 15 minutes back.
So just a note for people who are, I'm seeing a few, so for one of the proposals, one of the caps for machine pool, I see a few people requesting access for, requesting comment access. It is not ready to go yet. I've noted that the proposal is open for viewing if you're joining the SIG Cluster Lifecycle Google group, but it's essentially a copy pasta of a proposal that we'd written about VMSS. So not ready to go. It will be, and as soon as it is, everyone will get common access for it.
Thank you, Stephen. And yeah, up at the towards the top of the document, we do have the ongoing V1 Alpha 3 CAPS. CAP, if you're not familiar, stands for Cluster API Enhancement Proposal. And we have machine pool, cluster upgrade orchestration with the survey TBD, as we mentioned. There will also be a proposal TBD, and then a couple other items here as well on testing and control plane management. All right. I don't see anything else. So let's end early and see you all next week. And if you're interested in doing the open issue grooming and whatnot, please check Slack tomorrow. Either Tim or I will make sure that we post information about that when we're going to do it.
One thing I just wanted to shout out too is that to other people who would like to work on other things, if we had not called it out as being resourced directly by this group, I didn't necessarily see a proposal about remediation. I know Michael said he was going to commit to that stuff. And
actually, Murnau said that, but yeah, we'll get something out for that soon.
So if there are things that you're interested in as a consumer or a company or whatnot, and you are willing to resource and work on it, this list is not necessarily set in stone. Please write a proposal or open an issue, start to talk about it, and as a community, we can weigh the ability to get it done within the V1 Alpha 3 timeframe.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your Wednesday.